Word docs, or is there some other? Zoom. Oh.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, October 20th. This is the Litchfield Elementary School Governing Board study session, and this meeting is called to order. First on our agenda tonight is affecting grading practices. We will have Dr. Sarah Pearson and Principals Corby Naylor and Kristen Casillas presenting. Hi, Dr. Pearson.
Good evening, Madam President, Governing with our schools. And I think that this captured this really well. When I put this up here, I thought afterwards, I want to give you a purpose of the effective grading practices, but the purpose of this evening is to
those zeros early in the semester become A's late in the semester. Should you really or should you evaluate students where they are in the semester? Some of the best grading systems in the world that I have seen, and I've seen many of them, is miss those early failures and focus on how students are doing at the end of the semester. That's what a grade will reflect for a student is right there. So to review, let's get rid of the 0 and 100 point scale and go to a 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 scale. Let's get rid of the average. And I know what you're thinking. Our computerized grading system makes us do that. No, it doesn't. Your professional judgment is far better than any computer's judgment. And so override them, set the scale at 4 this fall, abolish the use of the automatic default of the average, and substitute your professional judgment. When I've had teachers say it's impossible, I've asked administrators, and we didn't change that. Unanimously, they say that they can. So let's eliminate those toxic grading practices. Now, some other key topics that I want to address. How about critiques? A lot of people say, in the real world, you got to get things done the first time. That may have been true in the 17th or 18th century. It's sure not true in the 21st century. You want to know what the real world is? It's all about making that work product, getting feedback, improving it, resubmitting it, getting feedback, improving it, resubmitting it, getting feedback, and improving it. That is the real world. And it's also the real world of grade school, where your feedback leads to improved performance. Now, I'm not saying that we take something endless, but I am suggesting you work so hard at giving feedback. Your feedback should be respected. And that means when I get your feedback, including feedback that says, no, you failed this class, or you failed this assessment, or you didn't do the homework right, the appropriate response is to do it again. That conveys respect for your feedback and an opportunity to do things better. I'm not suggesting that this is endless. I know what you're thinking. Kids will just sandbag us and submit all the work to the end. That's possible. But I think if we have incentives to do things right the first time, and if we have incentives to respect your feedback, you're not going to have things at the end of the semester. In fact, we'll have things early on using your feedback to improve performance. Finally, let's talk about separating behavior from academic performance. I realize that in addition to academic standards, you have behavioral standards. You want kids, for example, to be respectful. You want them to show up on time. You want them to engage in class discussions. All of those things are good behavioral objectives. So don't think for a moment that I'm focusing just on academic standards and comparing students to the standards we're grading. I respect the fact that you want good behavior. You want friendly attendance. You want engagement in class. In fact, I respect that so much that I think you should call good behavior, and don't call it algebra, don't call it social studies, don't call it English. That's why many schools have both an academic grade and a citizenship grade. If you really want better performance, don't confuse the academic feedback with behavioral feedback. Really specific on what you expect. It is okay to put those expectations in the report card, but list them separately from academic performance. So, grading is one of those things that if you get it right, it will support everything else you do. But we get grading wrong by the use of things like the 0 and 100 point scale, the use of the average, and confusing behavioral issues with academic issues. It will over everything else we do.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, we're switching back to the presentation. Dr. Reeves just touched on a lot of big components that we've been focusing on and diving into over the past several years. And so all of that is not encompassed into what we'll be talking about today, but it did hit on some big key components and the idea of feedback. The idea of ensuring that as we moved into this year, we knew there would be a lot of variables of why maybe students weren't doing work. Accessibility could be one of them. Technology issues. Student agency is something we're very aware of, and the feeling of isolation and all those other things that our wonderful behavior coaches and our student advisors are working to support, and we have this wraparound network of finding out why kids aren't showing up. But if that was to be compounded with also that shows up in by math grade, not being able to separate the understanding around the concept, and do we have are we confident that that student is leaving the 7th grade with that critical knowledge? Is that separate from some of these other pieces? We can leave that to chance. So I have 2 wonderful principals, and Corey's going to start and talk you through what the training was and go through that PowerPoint.
Good evening. So I'll just kind of pick up where Dr. Pearson left off. So when we first started talking about coming back in these 3 models, we knew that this was going to be a really critical part of our work because we don't necessarily know how much access to the teacher each student has when they're at home, how much help they have from their parents. You know, we have students in a hybrid model maybe coming in and out of learning, how much time on task they have. All of these things are so variable that it became really, really apparent to us that along with the critical standards, we needed clear evidence of where students were at with their mastery. So we started really talking about the focus shifting from what has been taught to students to what they have learned. And we know as administrators and educators that this is a really important practice and that grades need to reflect mastery of content. So we talked about that for a long time, and every campus is kind of in different places. We know that we need to do some work with subjectivity when it comes to grading with different teachers and consistency and what counts as a grade and what doesn't. You know, we've made gains over in the past few years, just talking about how, you know, extra credit points for a basketball game attendance doesn't translate to understanding algebra and why it's so important that we're not adding fluff to what students are reflecting in their grades. Because then what happens is we look at an A and we make the presumption that a student has a very solid understanding of 8th grade math, and then they go to take their AZ merit and their scores come back as false far below, and we can't figure out, or minimally proficient, and we can't figure out why the student has an A, and the parent's saying, he's gotten straight A's all year, I don't understand why this is happening. So we knew that this was really important, especially in this time. And so we got together some principals and teachers. Dr. Pearson put together a committee to look at grading practices and say, you know, we're not ready necessarily to jump to standards-based grading or anything like that, and it's probably not the time to do that. But how do we start looking at some of our practices and just make sure that the things we are doing are truly reflecting an understanding of the content that's being taught? And so we had some discussions, and also every campus was in a different place. So we wanted principals to be able to communicate with their own staff from where they were kind of starting or leaving off. And so we kind of came up with just some non-negotiables of things that need to be happening on campuses. And then every principal took it back to their own campus so they could kind of run with where their staff was. And so that's kind of what we talked about here. We want to make sure that we are looking at what do the kids need to know and how do we know that they've learned it? And those are kind of the starting blocks of the whole conversation. And so again, you know, we talked about that a little bit, just making sure that all students are learning equally, and we only have proof of that if the grades are defined the same across the district. So the use of effective grading practices helps because it ensures that grades measure standards mastery only. So back to, they don't measure how much help you got with your homework. They don't measure whether you went to the basketball game. I use that one because that was actually a scenario that came up at one point. Making sure compliance is not a factor in grading. And that's something that's really hard for people from my generation, because it absolutely was when I was growing up, that doing your work was a grade. There's grades for participation. There's grades for completion. There's grades for bringing your homework back. And that doesn't always translate into understanding. And so if that grade gets kind of inflated with other things, it's really hard to look at a grade and tell where a student is at. So we said practice is something that informs instruction before the assessment. So you can still get feedback on practice. It's okay to give feedback. Teachers should give feedback on homework. The student takes the time to take it home and do it. It's great for a teacher to give feedback to that student on what they need to work on or areas they need to improve. But it wouldn't necessarily be a great measurement to put in a grade book, because we have no idea how much of that they did on their own, how much support they have at home, or even whether it's directly tied to a standard. So if they had homework to go home and look up vocabulary words, that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about whether they can they've actually accomplished mastery. So we talked about eliminating practice as a grade, streamlining grading and lightening the workload for teachers. So here's another great positive to that. Every single thing that a kid does in a classroom doesn't have to have a grade. It can be feedback from the teacher, corrections, those little observations teachers make and give corrective feedback on, or even written feedback on assignments, but it doesn't have to go into the grade book. Just if they're doing it in a group or if it's a we do practice time, it doesn't necessarily show if that student has mastered the standard independently. So we wanted to streamline some of that, and also making grades justifiable to students and parents. And I will tell you, this is something that Scott Libby has been in this practice for a while, because Rochelle Morris, my predecessor, she was pretty big in this area and had a lot of background in it, and she made some huge jumps before I got there. And I can tell you that oftentimes in the past, a student who is failing a class, sometimes they would be failing it because they didn't turn work in, which these are kids who get highly proficient on the AZ merit, completely have all the standards mastered in that grade, and maybe they're bored or for whatever reason, they're not turning in work and completing it. So when I look at their reading grade, it says that they're failing reading. In reality, they're non-compliant, but they absolutely have mastered the reading standards in that grade. And so super important that our grades align to what students actually are able to do. So we talked about in our training, what should be graded? And so we start with that question of what is it we need kids to know? So that was the work that was done by the Critical Standards Committee, where they came up with those critical standards, things that no matter what this year, kids have to come away with. And we use those to determine, this is what we want kids to know. And so we asked teachers to decide, with using those critical standards, the specific part of the standard they're focusing on with the assignment. And then they basically take that piece of the standard, and that's what the objective is. The grade that would be taken would then be, how do we know they learned it? So we have, what is it they need to know? How do we know they learned it? And so how do we know they learned it? We create an assessment, either a common formative assessment, an exit ticket, or a quiz, something that directly relates to the part of the standard that we need them to learn. Exit tickets are a great example of that. You know, you start your lesson, this is our objective, and when we walk out the door, you can literally sort through your exit tickets and say, got it, got it, got it, got it, got it. Ooh, he needs some work on that. Got it, got it. It's a really fast way to get really immediate feedback on which students are still struggling. That helps to inform our reteach groups. It helps to decide what we need to do with the whole class. And we just ask teachers to ask yourself, does this directly assess whether this student is proficient with this part of the standard and that they can show mastery at high levels? And so we want to make sure that whatever that grade, that assessment is, can directly answer that question. So one of the first things we said is just grade book. Anything you put in your grade book should have the standard directly tied to it and the piece of the standard that you're working on, along with the points. And that was so that we get away from the thing like vocabulary words. You know, we make sure that whatever's in the grade book is directly tied to what it is we need kids to master. Benefits of this, we're able to determine what students know and don't know quickly. Like I said, that quick check to be able to say, this is the standard I'm working on this week. These are the kids that need more work. Pull those kids, reteach it, give them the extra time on task. The kids that already know it, we know that we can move them on to an enrichment activity so that we can make sure that all students have that mastery. Grades and benchmark and state assessments showed similar performance. And I think that's something that Rochelle has really had in place, that Scott Libby's assessment, there's our state assessments very often aligned very, very clearly to what we're seeing on our district benchmarks, as well as what we're seeing on our common formative weekly assessments, because we're constantly coming back to that standard and checking that assessment. And then clear communication with students and parents. And it does require communication on the front end for sure, okay?
It's the PDF.
Justifiable, so we know that the grades directly relate. Teachers don't need to sign a grade for everything handed in, so again, it's some time there. And then this is a huge part because it makes pulling those tier 2 intervention groups really easy. because the grades directly show who hasn't mastered it. I don't have to sort through who has A's because they participated more, they put more work in. I can tell exactly which kids need that time and pull them every week based on those standards. And then, so the non-negotiables we set this year were, again, across all modalities, this can be true. At least one grade is entered per week. That homework, if it's given, is considered practice and is not taken for a grade, but feedback should be given. Opportunity for last and best, like Doug Reeves talked about. I'm sorry, Fisher. Reeves, thank you. Opportunity for last and best is that it's more about when you learn it. It's more about that you learn it, not when you learn it. So if it takes you a little bit longer than the kids sit next to you, that's not the importance. We want to make sure kids master it before the end of the year. And then that comes back to that allow for retake until mastery. Maybe they haven't mastered it yet, so we'll keep teaching and we'll keep learning. And then not an average of the two, but replaced. So we don't want to punish children because it takes them a little bit longer to learn it. So we replace the grade. We don't average the two together. The best score goes in the grade book. And this is a huge kind of shift in paradigm for a lot of people, is that time is no longer the constant, the learning is. So it's not about the time spent on it or what the teacher has taught. It's about the student learning. And then graded assignments have to be tied to the standard and clearly labeled in Synergy. So just the big takeaway being that the time on task and exposure to content is going to vary a lot this year, especially with the learning models. And we just want to have evidence by the end of the year that every student has mastered every single one of those critical standards. And we should be able to tell from our data exactly which students have not, and that should be a direct reflection on their grades, on our report cards, as well as on our data walls or whatever we're using to track that data.
All right, thank you, Chloe. So I was not a part of the committee this summer, but have been working on effective grading practices with my middle school campus for the last couple of years. So I was really excited to hear that we were moving in this direction. Corby sort of presented the overall gist of the training that we did with all of our staff when we started the school year. And the first step really was, and she used the best word, which is shift. It was to get us to really think about our practices and commit to some shifts. It's a change of mindset, and that's exactly what step one is. Anytime you're going to make a change, is agree to the big picture and the why. So that was step one, but then it was time to really look ahead and talk about how are we going to, what are the logistics and how are we going to make this happen? Reeves talked about a 4-3-2-1-0 scale. We didn't have that available to us in Synergy at the time. So we had to work with our staff and brainstorm and come up with how are we going to make this work? We know it's what's best for kids. We know that this gives them the feedback that they need. It gives them the opportunity to grow and show that they've learned. And so we wanted to somehow find a way to make that happen. So what we started with was, and every campus was a little bit different at first. I think elementary went one route and then middle school took a slightly different direction just because things are different with different, seeing the different content teachers. But what was really critical was we wanted to somehow assign a score to the proficiency labels, just like you would on benchmark, just like you would on AZ Merit. So when we were asking our teachers to come together in their collaboration time and design their assessment, make sure that it's aligned to a standard. That could be a ticket out the door, the common formative that Corby mentioned. We have them sitting down and deciding, okay, let's look at the standard. What is highly proficient? What is it that we need to see them doing on this exit ticket? What is it that we need to see them doing or demonstrating to be a 10? And really clearly defining that. We wanted to move away from practices where a student sat down and did 16 math problems and they got 2 wrong and we just calculated it to a percentage. We really wanted to make sure that mastery was clearly defined in a criteria. And so this was something that was developed. A lot of the middle schools are using it, elementary something similar, I believe. And on our campus, I know that when they go to design their assessment, they actually take this grid and they might take a science standard, for example, and next to highly proficient, they will clearly write out what it is that they need to see on that ticket out the door. You know, they demonstrated this, they explained it this way, they had no errors, and sort of break it down. And that way,
the grade was consistent between the two teammates or in elementary and a grade level team. So this is sort of where we're headed and the point that we're at right now in the process. This work is happening on all of our campuses, and teachers are working together to make sure that our grades truly reflect mastery of a standard and that the criteria for mastery is outlined. So Sarah's going to talk about the timeline.
We're actually putting the 10-point scale into so all of the assignments that we put in the school level are on a 10-point scale. So when they were that's what we're talking about. Yeah, if you still calculate to a letter, so an 8.5, we still calculate to that. We haven't changed necessarily because we don't have the ability yet to synergy. The high school is a little bit different, right? So they have a ability to want to teach ability automatically. We weren't ready for that when we started on this journey, and so it's still, because we're at a 10 point, it still is going to calculate, it's still going to be a matter. So we're moving in the right direction. Yeah, so we're thinking, this would be a 10 is really what it is. I think our goal is to work with synergy to come up with what they think is best with all of the ideas that we talked about. It closes that gap between the 50 or the 60 and the 0. We don't want that to happen. I know here it might look like, well, what do you do with the 0? You know, what we're finding is that we're seeing fewer zeros. Occasionally we might have a student that says, nope, not doing it. But because we're no longer grading homework, we're no longer doing assignments and saying, yeah, take that home and finish it, bring it back tomorrow, and then it never comes back. Because we're doing these quick snapshots and just a test while the student is sitting there at least for in-person learning, we're seeing that the grading is really, really important thing. And so we don't have that issue.
And I'll talk a little bit about synergy and working with Kim Savage on that and part of our timeline. And that's really great to hear in just that student agency part as far as understanding, valuing their time and the effort that it's taking even for them to show up, whether it's online, in person, all that. There's just a lot of dynamics going into kids working really hard, teachers working really hard this year. So I feel like we're really laser focused and not on the right things. Okay, so I'm going to go back just a little bit to catch you up on timeline. The operational team that we had in the summer, that was Marlene Capriso, Corby Naylor as our administrator. We had elementary teachers and middle school teachers that contributed to this initial work and developed this presentation that then principals took back and they connected it to the work that they had already done on their campus. That was initial and it's ongoing as well too, so revisiting that. In August is when they facilitated that training on their campuses. Brings us to October. The great thing for Corby and Kristen put it out there and said, if you need support as we're coming up to this first quarter or even after with report cards, if you need to talk through anything, the principals collaborate so much on many things, whether it's through an email or when we're together in admin, just bouncing questions off. So they may have had those isolated conversations or just troubleshooting, but really just putting out there that support is there. But because they're connecting it to the work that the campuses are doing and where teachers' readiness level is, we haven't seen an overwhelming cry for help, reaching out. The next step in November is pulling them together specifically as elementary principals and middle school principals to talk about parent-teacher conferences. And those were moved from October to December. So really talking through how to help teachers feel prepared in having those conversations, help them understand, because there are questions. And like Corby said, our generation of understanding grading is very different. Having my parent hat on and seeing a child who is frustrated of working her tail off, but not getting it for different reasons, going, oh, well, they told me this and I get to take it again. And then that joy that comes of working hard and feeling the return on that. So I'm hoping that our parents are seeing the benefits of this, just like Kirby talked about, but we want to make sure that they're equipped for those conferences. Looking ahead to January, expanding this operational team to more of a larger committee and looking at the campuses and talking with principals and getting recommendations about teachers that would be great to serve on this, getting broader representation of who's doing that well, who's communicating well to students, who's communicating well to parents, and bringing them in. We want to make sure we have special educators as well as general education on that committee. Taking recommendations. Another idea would be further down the road, looking when the timing would be right to bring in parent participation as well too. We want that initial group to talk about setting their own timeline once that new group is formed, and having some Title I and non-Title I representation, as well as possibly something that comes out of the equity work. So the financial impact. Currently, there's no financial impact, but looking into the future, I've talked with Kim Savage. We know that professional development is absolutely something that we continue to invest in. There's many ways we can facilitate professional development, our experts that are on campuses, but there are, we partner with the high school when they brought in some awesome speakers. Shimmer is, was that 2 years ago now, I think, that we were able to participate in our free as professional development. Here's another expert on grading. So looking what's right as far as where our teachers are at and what maybe we need to bring in someone to facilitate that. Kim, in my initial talks with Kim Savage, there are many districts that are doing this. We know Opry is doing this. So there might be capabilities within Synergy that that we have access to that we're just not utilizing, and we need training, so that can have a cost. Or it could be that we need some customization. So I gave her some initial documents looking at our essential standards, what standards we may want to see in there, if there's drop down, if we have to customize that, or if working with other Arizona districts, that's something that they already have easily built in. So there could be some cost. Initially, when she thought it was a full report card change, much like K2, we were looking at around $1,500 and up. But then I clarified, she said, well, let me reach out first too. So she's gonna talk to Synergy, get some things set up, and hopefully we'll have some information when that committee comes together. We want that committee to set some timelines for what would be next year and then the following year for Synergy changes and just that readiness. So I can have a better update as we work and we know what that cost may look like. Any changes in Synergy typically need to be started around March, so they have plenty of lead time for when those changes happen. So, and the last thing is I just gave you some reading, some homework in there, and these are really, some are just excerpts because the articles were long, others are shorter articles. There's a lot out there. We're not the only ones that have this, are having this sense of urgency right now. Grading has been a huge topic for a long time, and just shifting towards more effective grading practices. Educational leadership is where these excerpts are from. The entire issue in September was devoted to grading and grade expectations. So you have some from there, as well as the Principal Leadership Magazine that came out for October, excerpts from grading in there. John Scudder was handing me those. So it's definitely a conversation that a lot are having just around student agency equity, and really making sure that we're focusing on the right things. So you have that reading, and I think the last one is just additional questions. My contact info. There's a lot. There's like but it just, I think it's energizing work. We knew that there were tough conversations as principal, as previous principal. I've had tough conversations. I did every year about grading, mostly like what Kirby said. The grades didn't necessarily match what came at the end, or subjectivity. And I think a lot of assumptions when there's a shift in grading is that the old system was working. It was comfortable, and we knew it well, but there were a lot of things that really didn't make it clear for a lot of kids. And so we want to timing. Kind of felt like this is a great time that this is urgent. We want to ensure that we are so laser focused on knowing what they have learned and not starting to start teaching. So Appreciate your time. Hopefully you can sense our passion around it. Yeah. Mhm. When you say in between, as far as like moving towards the like full-blown standards-based grading, I think maybe they can see to where the teachers are at. I think that initially there was more fear around it. Then now that they're seeing how students are responding, I think that training is going to be a big part of that. There's a lot of demands on time right now in training time. So it's something that getting some of these key pieces in place and getting teachers comfortable. I don't necessarily feel that we need to rush all the other pieces because there is so much competing for time. And so if we can make this a gradual, like we understand the why. We did make some big shifts this year and I feel they were justified. But I think that going slow to go fast is important. So I don't have a rush on this. I think that I want to make sure teachers feel comfortable and parents, and even shifting a little bit to helping our parents understand that. We're working a lot on making sure our teachers understand it themselves, they can articulate that, and bringing parents alongside so that when they start to ask questions, our teachers are equipped to answer those. So I don't see this as a rush. I would be very comfortable if that committee said, let's look at what capabilities and synergy make this easier as a time saver for teachers, because that can be pretty laborious, especially in middle school. Our DLA teachers have a lot of great entering right now with having students from multiple schools. So depending on how much that is, what that looks like for DLA next year too, and what the goals are, I want to make sure that those are aligned, those are streamlined. So. I think starting at this year, looking at 2 years, possibly 3, because I'm not sure what to make of this COVID year. That's a year. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
The screen so you can take the other
and then what do you need to get there, and how can you work individually? Because you're right, that's critical. But I always think back to the previous grading of wasn't necessarily all consistent either. A lot of subjectivity there. So oh, yeah. That's great feedback, and definitely something that when we come together in January, that would be a really important step to as part of their timeline to pull that out. And you mentioned something that was discussed of school kids moving from campus to campus, and that was a big reason in ensuring that there was consistency in that. And we did that. I haven't spoken to Tammy specifically about that. If there's something similar you want to talk to, or
I'm aware of it, but I don't know the impact at Western Sky.
I can only speak to Robert Middle School. That was part of our win for a little while, and it actually didn't mean 0 wasn't permitted on a grade. I know it seems counterintuitive, but it actually was referencing a time during the day where we pulled students who had not completed work because of will versus skill. So the kids that were just refusing, and we pulled those students and basically just sat with them and made sure they were completing those assignments and turning them in. So that's what our ZAP program was. And at the time, that's what Western Skies was, but I don't know if that's actually policy now. So, and to be honest, I don't know the follow-up.
All of this it feels like maybe we have to roll this out because we really need to quit it because so many things are going on. And it didn't seem like there was a really direct correlation who really wanting men and not. If there's a thing that folks I'd love to see, like, I use the conscious system as an example, so the fact that it's really kind of to, like, I'm not going to do it all for you. You're one to enjoy it. It's very defined things, right? I'm not going to even know myself, but I want to know that I am. We're going to teach you students. In year 2, we're going to teach you students. In year 3, so it's very clear, like, these are not goals, these skills, how you expect your beings, and then they're going to approach, they're not going to make sure that you want to students have 5 students first go out. Do you plan on doing the same thing here? That the consistency part is very easy. That's not true. You want to let them be for a while. We're in that far along.
Yeah.
Why this year without a full sort of period of grades ready to go? Why start this year and don't have enough knowledge?
So I apologize if the community get that. I don't feel like we have any principle that's out there. Like, I'm not sure what effective grading practices or these are new concepts. I'm sorry if that got communicated because I don't feel that's the case. When I mentioned you have schools that have a steeper climb. I feel in any given year, you're gonna have schools that have a steeper climb because of maybe circumstances that are out of their control with staffing. My example is you have maybe newer teachers, and some don't have as much turnover. That may always be the case. What we're looking at, I think we work to build over time, is some of those systems and the systems of PLCs, because that's where a lot of this work takes place, of really ensuring we know the standards and are creating those common formative assessments. We don't have high turnover with our instructional coaches. We don't have the high turnover with our administrators. So those critical people that are leading a lot of this work, that we're focusing on this professional development of shooting, I don't think there's a steep climb with those. So I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that. The consistency, I think there was a lot going on this summer. We looked at that task force as far as grading in that component. That was definitely a piece to consider. And we had to think about kids in 3 different learning modalities. And how did we ensure that we weren't losing sight on understanding and mastery in learning on those critical components as an educational institution. So if I have to defend time on that, I'm good with that, because at the end of the day, that's a worthy conversation in helping someone understand or helping a teacher. That's time well spent on ensuring that. Absolutely, I understand the need for a timeline and those clear, consistent pieces of this is when we'll all have these in place. The rollout of how we did CD with year 1, year 2, absolutely. I think that is reasonable. I think that's, we wouldn't want less than that. Ensuring we have the right people on board to do that, absolutely. And we'll continue that professional learning with our administrators. I don't want you to feel this is something that is new. It's really not, and not new to a lot of teachers. I think that the pieces of it and making it work with synergy has felt, with all the other things going on right now, has probably been frustrating at some points. So working to make that piece easier too, that's a commitment, I think very doable, given that there's other districts that do this. So a clear timeline and expectations, absolutely. Yeah.
I think in your statement, you want to do that. Have been doing this or parts of it, and some principals that have staff members that are coming, we're coming with it, other parents obviously would be on the level are not comfortable or not, they don't know. So what's your communication strategy? Like how do you start educating and really, you said I'm doing it now, but it wasn't communicating. So they're probably 2/3 of this, and I'm like, yes, I love it, it's awesome. But the third, I'm like, I don't know enough about it to say, yeah, I think this is awesome, you should drop the district. You guys do, so I trust that. But I'm saying I'm still questioning as a parent, how does this, work with my own kids, or how do I start to work with the teacher and better understand that? Since this is
already happening, right? We've already gone a quarter plus now. What's the communication strategy to let parents know? Because I've already seen, my kids are participating in some of the elements that we talked about. So it is happening, this is great. This is education, like, for parents, what do you need to tell them, and when do you need to tell them so that they start to click, right, of why these are all really important?
And how do you think about that? Just coming up with back and forth.
Yeah.
Which is, I think these next 2 weeks before we have our next performance is critical to make sure that we are using consistent verbiage, and that will really bring it down, because I'll tell you, the initial email I got from my teacher, who is an amazing teacher, was very education. And so it's hard to, if I had had better explanation at Millennium about what was happening, it would have made it easier for myself and many other parents as well. So I do think these next few weeks are critical to get down the message to parents to be able to explain it and really understand the format. And you might already have that done, but I think it's important.
When we talked about on that timeline, looking at November being a time to pull our principals together, ensuring that they know how to articulate that to their staff and ready them for conferences, providing them the tools, the layman's terms, as far as breaking that down as a parent. What do I need to know, and what does this mean? Is an important part of that, because I think that the connection that a parent has with the teacher and hearing that from them initially, and those aren't very long, but at least if they can speak to that and start the initial conversation, following that with, we can send some messaging, some videos, things like that speak to it, but hearing it explained for some of those questions answered from your child's teacher, and ensuring the teacher understands that first, and that kind of window that we have, so that we can have that initial explanation coupled with parent-teacher conferences. And maybe it's something they read that comes out before they actually come to the conference, or that they view, I think would be helpful.
How do you address that in the middle school parent-teacher conferences, or you don't necessarily have the same connection with every single teacher, right? We're going to visit every single teacher, unless you meet and you're like, this is doing fine. I'm like, I know, I just like for you, and you're like, of course.
We like to do
And I'm like, oh, of course you do. I'm like, this is the only way I get to meet you. So anyway, how do you do things like that? Because, we're not always doing that meeting as much as we're trying. Those middle school parents are, I'm one of them, so I get to say that. They don't
I am
know
too,
what
so.
they should. So
Right.
how do we, how do you work around those difficulties? Because they're not always going to be really one.
We've tried so many different formats at the middle school to come up with 3 different middle schools I've been at now to try to come up with the perfect setup and situation. And the best situation that I've seen is chunks of time done through Sign Up Genius. And that's probably what we'll do. I'm actually really excited about parent-teacher conferences, because even in just listening to the phone calls that my teachers have had with parents that have called to ask about a grade, they've even commented to me the shift in the conversation, because they can go right back to that color-coded grid and say, when they ask, well, what's going on? What does my student need to work on? It's no longer what I walk through parent-teacher conferences every year and I listen to is, well, he's not doing the work, he's coming to class late, he's not prepared. That's what every middle school conference sounds like for students that are not doing well. Very rarely is the conversation about, I've noticed that in his writing, he can cite evidence, but he's not doing a very good job of explaining or elaborating. And so what I'm going to be working on with him is this. So I just sat through a conference the other day, or a phone call the other day, where I actually heard the teacher doing this and talking about, well, they got a 6.5, but let me explain what that means. He was able to do this and this, but he was not able to do this and this. And the solution is going to be, we have office hours, or I'm going to work with him during this time. So I'm actually really excited. But I hear what you're saying. The feedback is, I know we've been sort of tackling those conversations one at a time. And from my campus, the perspective is that a lot of those conversations are going well. But maybe we need to look at some standard messaging that maybe goes out. I know the letter went out that sort of explains that, but maybe we need to work on something as a district. I know that there are various parent nights sort of virtually popping up. I know Wigwam Creek had theirs. Mine's actually next week, and I'm actually doing a session on effective grading that parents can pop into. So I know that many of us are doing our best to try to come up with a way to educate them because we know that conferences might be difficult if we don't get a clear message out there. So it's something we can definitely talk about. Right.
Someone's not gonna use this way, someone's not gonna use that way. We have a lot of families that, especially during the summer, we're not sure we're gonna see everyone or how that's gonna work. So, I mean, I think that's a great approach. Keep doing it, keep doing whatever it is, will come, before us. So, it's
Right.
clear that it's going well so far.
Yeah.
And that's promising for sure. So,
Yeah.
And one-on-one, obviously, is the best way, right? Is when it's someone,
Right.
everyone's not gonna get this great presentation, otherwise, why would you send them out?
There's so many great videos.
Will the presentation be up there so I can practice the clicker?
It's already up.
Great.
For what I'm doing.
Right. I think for middle school, to answer your question, I think we're going to have to, as a team of teachers, come together and really look at those second quarter grades that are going to be going out and saying, this is the one I need to meet with. I know he's in your homeroom, but he's doing really, really well in your class. So I would like to take the lead on this. And we're going to have to come, work it out because you're right. It's impossible to. And many times the student's doing just fine in some of those. So I think we're just going to have to be intentional and strategic about how we schedule those.
Okay, so if you want to sit down, please by all means. Feel like you can. I don't have a lot of questions. I didn't mean it that way. I just want to make sure I understood something in the presentation that I read earlier. You will be adding in assignment work of some sort of grade, or you only sticking with this grading on assessments?
So classwork can often still be an assessment, if it is connected to a standard. And we have a criteria for mastery. There's no reason why a student couldn't do something in class and
To
put
get
in
those
the grade
extra
book.
points.
Well, it's put in the grade book as an assignment. It's something that they're still doing independently, but maybe you're not calling it a quiz or an exit ticket. But as long as it is connected to a standard and it truly reflects what they were able to demonstrate, that mastery of that standard.
The reason I asked that, you guys, is because what I did see at Millennium quite often is that only assessments were graded and those scores would come in, and then there would be a ton of work done in the classroom, there would be a ton of work sent home. All of that product was in return, but it was never graded and never put in the book. This really applied to special ed, which is going to be my next question for you about this, because one of the issues that I have seen there was that when you don't have a special education room that people are going into, and you have a lot of mainstream kids, it is up to the teacher to assess what their level is. And when I say that, some kids are not going to get 10 in special education. They're just not. They just don't have those skills. Some of our teachers weren't assessing them and so grading them up to the 10. So then, no matter how many times they retook the assessment, which is great that you're allowed to do that, that's fantastic, we were never seeing any progress. So just as long as that caveat is there in the back of your mind, because especially in elementary school, we have a lot of special ed kids that are in those mainstream classes that are pulled out into special grouping. But some of this work is still done in the classroom. And same thing in middle school that you see as well. A lot of mainstreaming that goes on. And we just weren't able to recoup any points because we weren't grading any other work.
So Melissa McComb actually went through, and we looked at using the example of the rubric that Kristen had up, and they went through and did an additional piece of this presentation where we talk about really looking at the standard and what it is that kids need to be able to do to show mastery, and then talking about what those modifications would look like to where if a student that has an IEP that has specific needs, maybe this is what mastery looks like for that student, and then that's scaled from there.
And that has also been scaled in the grade.
Right, yeah, they're still able to show mastery based on what they can, what they're able to do to show mastery, and it doesn't show up as failing.
And so then probably all of your caseworkers will then definitely have to have those one-on-one conversations with all the teachers.
Right.
Which sometimes is missed in previous work.
She created a great video. Her and Stacey Minnick, our math coach. It was like a morning show. It's like Mornings with Melissa. It was a great video and it made it, very clear, and they gave some examples, and it was very helpful.
That was the hardest thing about millennium, is that there just was no other way to earn the extra points, and so we took that next assessment.
And I think the work, giving the feedback on, honoring the homework and that classwork, as long as it's not maybe a group assignment, but really you feel confident in that it's understanding, it's an individual understanding, and you can assess that from this class assignment. Absolutely.
I really like that they're able to find other ways to prevent other grades.
Well, what I like about it is instead of doing a class assignment that has, 27 things on it, and, you're grading based on the number you got right and the number you got wrong, they're getting very specific. So although they might be practicing the scale in a variety of different ways in an assignment, the teacher might really just be grading number 4, because number 4 is really getting at the other pieces might be prerequisite skills, and they really want to see where. So it's very intentional.
There was also, I'm sorry. No, really.
Additionally, I think the other thing that happens, that I've seen a shift in our students, is that they start to recognize that failing the first time because you didn't get it the first time is okay. And they start to advocate for their own mastery because they know that no matter how long it takes them to get there, they're going to get to that grade. So part of it is shifting the kids' thinking over, you don't need extra points to get to the grade. You need to learn and master the concept.
Exactly.
And then you're gonna get the grade. So you're gonna get it because you learned it. And so that has been a shift. And once the kids see that, they really start to advocate for their own mastery. Oh man, I need to reteach on this.
Yeah.
Because they realize just because I failed it the first time, I'm not one and done and it's over.
And it's beautiful when it happens. I was sitting in an 8th grade math class recently, and very vulnerable. The students are understanding it. They have no problem saying, Mr. O, I got a 5.5 on this. I'm not getting it. I need to come to reteach, or I need to work out some tutoring. They get it. They really, really do. So it's really cool to see them feeling empowered. Like they understand, okay, I didn't get it the first time, and that's okay. There are things that I can do to improve.
That's myself as well. Yeah, that's absolutely myself. But it's just the only caveat that I ran across.
Yeah.
And
And if we have to move on, we can hear that new presentation. I have one last area. I love the idea of this. Great. Is that something that you were considering?
It's been on our, it's been on our, it'll stay on there. So there's a citizenship section.
So some of those things that could now be tied to citizenship are the things that we removed from grading, right? So some of those compliance pieces can now be incorporated into that citizenship grade. We removed it from the A, B, C, D letter grade.
And it's
Look lower.
not feel like reading is
Not on the midterm, but it is on the end.
It's on our quarter ones.
I've never seen that, so I will definitely go back and look now. 'Cause I haven't seen it. I think
On the middle, so on 3rd through 8th, it shows up as like the S or E, or it's like in the column next to it. On the K2, it's like on the next page, and it's kind of just under citizenship. Yeah, but it's next to the letter grade, I believe, on the 3-8, and that's not changing.
I think it's great. I mean, I think that it's
Have fun with this.
I mean, if you're really able to separate the behavior from your academic performance and say that, then it's a great. We're not listening to work.
Computer and PowerPoint, just get it back to the office.
To your point, they make up that feeling great, which is very difficult to confidently understand because they have other factors going on. So, yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Another thing, thank you. No, appreciate it. All right, up next on our agenda, we're on one seat.
Okay, we're going to shift gears just a little bit. So good evening, Madam President, Superintendent Gunning, and LESD community. My name is Amber Checky. My pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the Executive Director for Anytown Leadership Program, which is an organization here in Arizona that's been partnering with LESD to support with some awesome new initiatives this year. I want to pass it to my co-presenter to introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Zabosik. I am a parent of LESD student, and I am also an employee of the district. I feel kind of underdressed, but this is my everyday, where when I am definitely honored, and it's such a privilege to be here to present this evening.
So funny you say you feel underdressed. I feel the most overdressed that I've been in probably 9 months. So thank you so much for having me here today. Before I begin, I just feel really compelled to share with anybody in this space and anybody out in the community that I live in, and share that like I do really experience or really understand the experiences that many of our families and students have gone through this summer, both just experiencing a lot of collective grief and shock and sadness and anger with regards to what happened and continues to happen over the summer, both with regards to the pandemic and the calls for racial equity and justice happening all over our country. So we are so appreciative to be in partnership with the district that just truly cares about making our world a better place and making our communities a better place. And so if you're on the call, I see you. Well, I can't see you. I know you're there. So that is us. Apologies, I don't know how to use it. Okay. Yep. So just a little bit about Anytown. Anytown is an organization that's been around for about 100 years. We were formed as through an organization called the National Conference for Community and Justice. And really, we partner with educational institutions, so schools, businesses, workplaces, to support them with their equity and inclusion initiatives. And we really like to do that in close collaboration. So more than being an organization that comes in and does like a one-time training for that school or that district, we like to partner over the long term to really support with long-term sustainable change, recognizing that it does indeed, it is indeed important to go slow, to go fast, to make that real deep kind of impact. So we've been around again since the early 1920s. We educate, we empower, and we embrace differences of all kinds. One more thing about our history, if you are familiar with the name Anytown, Anytown we also run a youth program, a youth development leadership program over the summer. We have many members of our committee who actually attended our summer camp back in high school, so if you're familiar with that, we do youth programs as well, but all of our partnership with schools and educational institutions and businesses, 100% go to fund our scholarships for our youth. So really just kind of comes back full circle. All right, so I'm here to share with you where we have come with the Diversity Empowerment Committee so far. If this is the first time you've heard about the committee, which I don't think it is, who are we? We launched the Diversity Empowerment Committee in July 2020, so it's hard to believe it was only 3.5 or so months ago. But the committee is really composed of lots of different members of this community. So we have school leadership, we've got parents, we've got teachers, we've got student transporters, members of our school governing board, and district staff, all really coming together with this clear intent that we want to make sure that we have equitable achievement outcomes for every student, and that every student within LESD school district really feels a sense of dignity and a sense of belonging, showing up to school every day or logging in to school every day. So the school is represented. We've got really a pretty good makeup. We'd love to see more, so let's plug that in. We'd love to see more, but since this committee is new, just having that diverse representation in terms of leadership and parents and community members really makes all the difference with just starting to initiate that work and figure out what direction we can go moving forward. There we go. All right, so really in the first phase of our work, okay, and I'm going to highlight that a little bit later. In the first phase of our work, we knew that as a committee, we had to focus on learning, listening, and understanding. Many of you probably heard the quote by Stephen Covey, He says, listen to understand. I know you all heard that before, because you're all, again, in education. I've been trying to get our committee to really shift our thinking, lean into listening and understanding things that are different from them, and really kind of reshift their thinking to listen to believe rather than listen to understand. Okay? And there's a really big key difference between listening to understand and listening to believe, because when we believe the experiences of our students and we believe the experiences of our staff, we believe the experiences of our families, only then can we really understand the root of the challenges that we have, so we can attend and move forward and move into, again, just a greater, more inclusive community. Okay? Listen to believe. If I leave you with anything, take that with you. So motivations for joining this committee. Like I said, we have a wide range of individuals on this committee. Every single person who joins the committee has different motivations, different aspirations for being there. But I feel it's important for everyone here to hear from this one person, right over here, one person as to why this committee is so important, why it's important that this committee work continues, and why equity and equitable student achievement outcomes really need to be a priority, both for our district and for our world. So I'm going to pass it over to you, because I think this is the highlight of the show.
Well, I don't know if my life story is a highlight, but I am always glad to share it. Why am I here? Well, again, I have two vested interests. I'm a parent of a child in LESD school, and I am a district employee. Well, before we moved to Arizona, my family and I lived in a very affluent community with excellent schools. However, with access to the best schools, we decided to homeschool our youngest son because of the lack of diversity in the student and staff body. And our fear was that he was not old enough to know if he was not being treated fairly or to speak up for himself as a child of color. Have you ever had to think about that? Well, my husband retired after 22 years in the U.S. Army. We have lived literally everywhere. So our experience is different than many, but very much like the families in this very community that serves Luke Air Force Base. Wherever we've been, we've adjusted to customs and culture, and that reflected the community. Food was always a favorite to discover. We've made many friends over a good meal. When my family and I moved to Arizona, like most families, we searched for a decent area to finish raising our 3 daughters and our son. It was also important to find an area that was diverse and reflective of the community we desired. Most important to us was the diversity throughout the school district. We found this in Litchfield Elementary and Agua Fria School District. All of our kids have wonderful, diverse friend groups. Our oldest graduated EMCC and is finishing up at ASU. Our middle daughter is a graduate of Desert Edge High School and is in her senior year at Grand Canyon University. And our youngest daughter attended Western Sky Middle School and graduated from Desert Edge as well. She is now a sophomore and preparing to enter into the nursing program at GCU. Naval Paget Elementary was my son's introduction into brick and mortar setting in first grade. His teacher was gender relatable. This was important to him, and I feel it set the tone for his learning experience. He is now at Western Sky Middle School. However, as we went along, we discovered the lack of diversity in staffing. This disturbed me greatly, even though our son has had a generally good learning experience. As he transitioned into middle school, I realized even more of a need for him to see and experience more diverse representation and identity among his teachers as he began to mature and find his confidence. I've always found myself heavily involved at my kids' school for this very reason. Not just as much, there was just not as much diversity as I was determined to be that glimmer. Whether it was volunteering or actually teaching music, I was involved. As employment opportunities presented, to everyone's surprise, I declared my desire to drive a bus. Well, I was hired as a student transporter here in LEFC. During my training, I learned that I was more than just a bus driver. With safety in mind, first and foremost, I learned that I must present an emotionally safe place for my rolling classroom as well. As student transporters, we are the first face these kids see in the morning and the last they see after school. We give them the first impression and the last impression of their school day. We have the power to make it or break it. So I found it imperative to treat every student with fairness and attention to individuality that I expect for my own child to be treated. And also realizing that this must be in every adult every child comes in contact with throughout their day, not just teachers. However, I observed areas needing attention in day-to-day interactions with students. So I asked about training and found that the district was actively engaging in conscious discipline programs. However, it was not yet available for classified staff. But when it did come available, I was excited, as many of its contents incorporated exactly what is needed in instructing staff how to react and interact with the diversity and inclusion in mind. But I felt this area of representation and equity needed greater emphasis and study. Conscious discipline incorporates many great foundational building concepts that flow right along with diversity and inclusion. The compassionate culture of we says that we all belong here and care for one another. Connecting brings us together in understanding how we interact with one another. Our connection governs our behavior. The connected family and school family is the safe, connected culture where problem solving is possible. Within that connected culture, we are being compassionate, using language of safety, not just physical, but emotional. Noticing goes beyond behavior though, but recognizing and respecting cultural freedoms and boundaries and the celebration of differences. For example, I wished a coworker a happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and she was much appreciative of the acknowledgement. I also noticed my Sikh student wearing his Keski or Damala or Dastar, but I did not make a big deal about it or comment on it unnecessarily. In my journey of becoming brain smart, I had to identify my skills and behaviors of my brain state. Knowing how emotional I was during the first few weeks of racial unrest after the brutal murder of George Floyd and general racial unrest felt throughout the nation, I didn't want to stay in that emotional state. I had a strong desire to function in my executive state. I'm about action. I wanted to make a change in a constructive way. So after reading some insensitive comments on social media from fellow coworkers, I reached out to my departmental director, and the timing was just right as he and his compassion and understanding submitted my name to Megan DeFlame about a committee being formed to address these concerns within our district. And I cannot tell you how excited I was to go to work on improving our district in this committee. Amber of Any Town Leadership Camp and Inclusion Council has brought and is continuing to equip us with pertinent information and education so we as a united committee can do the necessary studies and bring the necessary suggestions for change, improvement, and even accolades in encouraging the great moments for betterment of our beloved district. I know we believe that every child is important and every employee is valued, but ensuring the esteem and confidence in everyone is valued through diversity and equity is most important. I believe in seeing people as they want to be seen, not as I perceive them to be. And oh, how easy it is to assume and dismiss. But to see someone as they would like to be seen is essential in this village. For our fellow employees and every student we are responsible for. Possessing the desire to understand and making the effort to come out of our individual and tribal boxes and into some uncomfortableness to get the problem solved is urgent for the success of our schools today. We all understand the analogy of the creation of a pearl, don't we? It doesn't just become beautiful without the process of refining. And that refining is uncomfortableness of the irritation and friction. But I will tell you, this group that we have is already in it for that process. I'm proud of each and every one of their humbleness, vulnerability, and willingness to work together. I am honored to be in such a group working for the students of our district. In my personal belief, there is a scripture from the Bible, from Romans 12:18, that reads, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." And according to one of my childhood heroes, Fred Rogers, he said, "We live in a world in which we need to share responsibility. It's easy to say, it's not my child, not my community, not my world, not my problem." Then there are those who see the need and respond. I consider those people my heroes. So I am here to do my part to support, to cultivate the future heroes that will understand and embrace the world even more than the previous generation.
That was just beautiful. I'm so impressed with you. And I also just want to say that when somebody comes and shares their story with you, okay, they come to share their story, that story can encompass a lot of joy and a lot of hope, and can also encompass a lot of pain, okay? Not just our families, again, Jocelyn was prepared for this, agreed to be here, but please know that your students and your families also have a story, one in which we must ask to hear, and one that we have to think if we hear it. Okay, I'll leave it at that. So thank you, Jocelyn. All right, so I'm going to highlight for you what we have been doing and what we hope to do. Okay, I mentioned we launched this committee in July of 2020. We started our committee in the phase of learning and training, recognizing that everyone on the committee comes from a different walk of life, and we all really had to develop the same foundational understanding and the same foundational language to really be able to talk about this work with empathy and with understanding. So everyone on the committee received training from us, okay? Secondly, we have participated in 3 meetings so far, 3 and only 3, okay? Can't change the world in 3 meetings, but we've had 3 virtual meetings focused on laying the foundation for an effective diversity, equity, inclusion, empowerment committee. Spending time looking at Litchfield's data, okay? So really diving into the data of our district, using our district data to inform the work that we want to be moving forward. We spent time going through our Anytown educational rubric, which goes into more than just data, but other indicators around representation, engagements and interactions, policies, practices, systems, handbooks, written things, all the things that encompass really that kind of structural inclusive practice within a school district. And then we spent a little bit of time doing some affinity group work, sharing within identities that are similar to ours. Again, really just to create that space, that brave space for folks on the committee to ask the questions that they needed to in order to inform how they proceed into work moving forward. So that's what we've been up to. Really all of the work with your districts, we do it in 4 phases. Okay, we start at that assessment phase. We've spent the last couple of months really assessing. We can continue to assess, of course, but really assessing right now that we are in, oh my gosh, it's October. Now that we're in October, okay, we're moving into that strategize phase. Strategize meaning we've taken in a lot of information, both qualitative and quantitative. We're going to strategize how this work can be implemented moving forward through the use of setting strategic goals, okay, around equity, as well as actions and priorities in order to get us there. Meaning both what the committee itself can do, as well as what charges and acts need to be put out to the broader community or other leadership team members of different schools in the form of subcommittees to drive the work moving forward. We're now in that strategize phase. And then implement, okay, after we strategize, that's when we really go to town, okay? We get the work done, we go through the curriculum or whatever the goal is, go through the curriculum, go through the holidays, go through the things and change them in an effective, inclusive way. And then ongoing support. So that's just the overarching structure of our work. All right, so we felt compelled to share with you some of the things that we looked at as a committee. Okay, really looking at demographics, discipline, and achievement. We looked at a lot of things, but these are the ones that really floated to the top. So we wanted to share some data with you. Okay, first and foremost, demographics. Okay, looking at student demographics. I'm going to give everyone just a chance to take a look. Okay. These are our student demographics as of July 2020. Okay, looking across the board, you'll notice some variables and some differences from school site to school site. I want you to look at a few of them, keep them in your head as we move to our staff demographics. Okay, what stands out to me with student demographics here is that, again, across the board, across Litchfield School District, we do have, anywhere from 20 to 50% Hispanic, Latino, Latinx students. Also have a very high population of white, European, Caucasian American students. Very, very low Black, African American population. And even since this data came out, our Black student population has gone down by 2%. Not cause for alarm, but it causes us to lean in and say, why? Okay, why is this the case? Is it anything that we could have had control over? Is it not? Okay. Now let's take a look at these staff demographics. Okay, this one I want you to look a little bit harder at. Okay, we got our certified staff, classified staff, and administrative staff. Okay, in an ideal world, in an ideal district, in an ideal school environment, our staff, our leaders, our people that our students look to learn from, would really reflect the demographics of the student body, okay? Not just from teacher to teacher, but looking at what they can aspire to be or do or achieve. Not just what do my teachers look like, what do my certified teachers look like? What do my administrative professionals within the district look like? So you'll notice just here in Litchfield, okay? Right now we have 36 administrators who identify as white, 5 administrators that identify as Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and we have no other administrators of any other racial affinity. Okay. Other thing that stands out for me here, again, it highlighted, we do have some diversity within our district, but there's a really big gap between our classified and our certified staff. I know and I understand that this district prioritizes hiring from within. It is a value that many districts see of importance, but we gotta figure out how can we get more of these classified staff into higher positions if that is the case, okay? Or what are we doing to attract folks from outside the district into our district? And simultaneously, what are we doing to retain the diverse individuals that we have in our community? I'm a parent, okay? Like, I am a parent. I have one child who is white. I am soon to have a new child, kind of foster parent and adoptive parent, soon to have a young child who is Black. And I've been looking at the educational system so different right now, just really truly understanding that my soon-to-be daughter, what she needs and what I look for in a district is diverse representation of our students and staff, and what I'm going to be looking at for my son might look different, and it's not fair. It's not fair to parents to have to make that choice. Okay. Classified, certified, admin, again, just as a whole, looking back at our student demographics and our staff demographics, very different. Okay. All right. And then lastly, looking at the population of Maricopa County as of the most recent census that is up, always keeping in mind not just our districts and our ratio of demographics between student and staff, but the demographics as they relate to our broader close community. Are we excelling, right? Or are there areas for improvement? So, for example, Black African American, right now, according to this, 6.4%. And then again, within Litchfield, 2.71% across all staff, increasingly less as we get up to leadership positions. All right, the next thing we want to share with you is around discipline, okay? Statistics show that students of color, particularly Black students, but students of color, tend to receive a more severe or longer duration of discipline than other students, okay? That's just the statistics. Students of color receive harsher discipline, usually a longer duration of discipline due to, again, bias that happens within an educational institution. Though we cannot know the exact reasons for these students, because we haven't gone student to student and dove in that closely, what we've got here in Litchfield is that Black students represented around 6-7% of the student population and received 18.9% of suspension as of, I think it's the same thing, March 2020. Okay, huge gap. One other thing that I noted that's not on these slides is that we also went in and looked at the in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension data. Students of color across the board, Latino, Latinx, and Black students received more out-of-school suspensions than their counterparts, okay? So even in terms of receiving discipline, who's receiving more excessive discipline, in school, out of school, lots of variation. So things to be looking closer at. And last but not least, certainly many others, but just pulling these to the top, achievement. Okay, we took time to look at the AZ merit proficiency achievements, just recognizing based on this grid, these bars, okay, students who identify as Asian and white are slightly excelling more as it relates to academic proficiency, okay? And our students, again, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, African American, struggling a little bit more academically. This probably will not surprise you with state data, you know, we got state data, national data, all the same. However, when you look at the grids from where a student starts out at the beginning of the year to when they're taking their final, you know, their last portion of these test scores, we're also seeing that students that start out lower and receive more intervention are able to excel or increase that score at a higher rate. Students that start out higher also able to see, reach increase those scores at a higher rate, but we've got a huge gap of folks in the middle, okay, that we have to ask, why is this happening? Are they receiving less intervention? Are they being deterred in any other ways from academic achievement? And what does this mean? Okay, we looked at the reading, math, all of the above, but just really noticing again that increase from students at the bottom, students at the top, and then kind of in the middle gets a little bit murkier, grayer, gotta dive more into it. Oh, there's the other one, math. Okay, so you'll notice with math, Asian, African American, Hispanic, white, huge increase. And then we kind of, again, notice a few more things with folks who are testing middle, lower. Okay. All right, I'm going to pass it to Jocelyn because I want her just to share her reflections. I know that from the committee, there were a lot of strong reflections when we looked at the data for the first time. So I'm just going to give it to you for a few minutes to share your reflections as well as what the reflections were on the committee when they saw it for the first time.
Yeah, well, I think the numbers speak for themselves, and even for those of us that aren't numbers people, I am a numbers person, and I like to see the data because we all have, you know, feelings and perceptions and experiences that we can speak to. But when we can put it all on a sheet of paper and see those numbers, it's shocking. It really, I think we were all kind of speechless because we pride ourselves in, you know, the environment that we're in. I don't think any of us had super negative, you know, experiences, but when we see that on paper, then we can kind of go back in our minds and think of incidences, and there were some incidences that were shared within the district that, you know, that happened. Was it, we talk about implicit biases, there's a lot of that. We just have to be honest with ourselves. We all possess bias. The implicit bias, unfortunately, disproportionately affects children of color and their growth and esteem in school. And so I think this is why we see these numbers happening, not because a certain demographic is just inherently, you know, that way or however, but it's because, you know, not saying that teachers are racist, but they're biased, some, and that bias translates over in how we feel and treat our students. So for me personally, it was an eye-opening and an introduction into the work that we must do. It is very imperative, and the numbers definitely show. So I think the rest of us certainly were there. I just had to take a moment to process it because there just really wasn't a response to that other than, wow, we have a work to do. And I wouldn't say it's anyone's fault, like we don't purposely do that, but I think because the culture that we're ingrained with kind of teaches us that, some people may not be as smart as other people, and that's the way that we teach them, or we react to them, or however. So this is why this work is important for our district. It's a wonderful district, but I think we need to go a touch further and being the example in this area, this county, the state, the nation, to look at Litchfield Elementary School District and say, I want to send my kid to that district because they're going to be safe there, they're going to be cultivated and really pushed to be their very best, not on the basis of their color or racial makeup, but truly on the content of their character and their willingness to learn. And being a part of that village, I want to be a part of that experience going forward. It's not going to be an overnight change, but like I said, we're in it for the process of it, and we'll be here.
Awesome. Okay, so you'll notice in the data that we shared with you, we did focus a lot on race ethnicity. Okay, we want to be mindful that when we look at equity across the board, we're really talking about valuing, celebrating, embracing differences, not regardless of, but with consideration and appreciation for those differences. So race, faith, gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, appearance, and ability are the ones that I cited. Okay, all of these things, we have to look through all the action that we take with that equity lens, and really be able to put ourselves in that child's shoes or that family member or that teacher's shoes to know and understand, are we doing things as equitable as we can possibly be. Something as simple as what holidays we're celebrating, what celebrations are happening in classrooms, what curriculum is integrated into our classrooms, whether or not our teachers, staff, faculty feel as though they are equipped or capable to enhance curriculum or add to curriculum where there are gaps in what's received from the state that they have to administer. Really, it requires a lot of thought and a lot of intention to support people in doing what they need to do because they don't get enough support to make that happen. So those are our reflections. As I mentioned before, we spent time going through the Anytime Educational Institutional rubric, which goes into things much more than just data. This is a tool that I can share with folks if you'd like to see the indicators on it. Super valuable, but really looking at engagement and interactions, policies and systems, and where we sit on a 1 to 4 scale with each of those indicators as it relates to staff, as well as it relates to students. They're 2 separate sections. Okay, so that's what we spent our time on in our last few committee meetings. So where are we now? Okay, we are now moving into the strategize phase. Strategize and implement, but strategize. Okay, we've had 3 meetings, we've had some foundational learning. We will continue to lead into learning because things are continually evolving and will continue to evolve over the next 3 weeks, 14 days. And we are going to be setting strategic goals, okay? Goals that are going to come out from this committee, meaning these are our top 5 or 6 goals for 2020-2021 school year, even leading into the fall. I know this year's a little bit different. What are the deliverables and the actions that we must take as a committee? And what are the deliverables or actions that we don't have the agency to make happen yet, and who is designated to make that, to help support that in happening, okay? And deliverables and timeline. Based on our discussion, my premonition, we're doing our goal setting on Thursday, this Thursday. My premonition is that the goals are going to fall under one, or likely in these categories, because this is what we've talked about the most. Diverse staff, hiring and retention. How do we attract? How do we retain? Is there any bias in that process? What are we missing? Okay. Number two, diverse curriculum, both what exists as well as what staff need to be able to have agency or autonomy to enhance in different ways if they don't have access to what they need. Okay. Number three, acknowledgement, events, celebrations, announcements. How can we integrate more diversity into our classrooms, virtual or otherwise? Okay, what's on our walls? What do we have access to? What books are being used? Really, that's acknowledgement, acknowledging differences across our campuses. Four, continued learning and professional development. Always a need. Professional development is top of the list for anyone and everyone. We're going to really assess what those professional development needs are so that that learning can be better integrated across every single campus. Okay? And five, discipline and achievement. Okay? What interventions exist? What can we do to hold ourselves accountable to discipline data and otherwise that is not reflective of who we are at the core? Okay, what systems need to be really in place to equalize, I guess, the discipline that's happening based on our student methods and achievement. Okay. And then lastly, developing external facing statements and communication of values and goals. We're going to have a discussion about this in the upcoming meeting and the meetings to come about how we're communicating with the broader community, what is happening. Every district does something different. Some districts put up a diversity equity inclusion website with resources, continual communication of what's happening. That'll be a topic of discussion for the committee moving forward too, is how do we get this out to the broader public to make sure that folks know this is being prioritized and not every parent's going to know that this is being focused on. As I said before, our goal again is to create educational equity, ensuring that all of our students have access to achieve without any barriers, okay? Not regardless of who they are or the differences that they bring to the table, but with consideration, appreciation, and I'll say celebration for those differences, because those differences are what make every community a great place to be, participating alongside folks who they can learn from and grow with. And that's all we have today. So I'll see if anybody has any questions, but pretty straightforward as to where we are.
that with the community to become really on iPad ready. Something that said, if you have no privilege, what you do is help. The general situation said, this sort of said that if you have the ability to create a policy, that is your responsibility to do that. And so I saw an opportunity along with so many other people who had this time to really try to make it. And so I appreciate your involvement in the community and everyone else who's involved. It's another especially I was so optimistic and I just think we should spread more of that through all of our members and all of us here.
Well, yeah, thank you all for having me. I just wanted to add one thing too about the policies, practices, systems. A lot of schools, I would say, do come to us with, this idea in mind that we can come in and create culture change, okay? Culture change, yes, takes a lot of time, okay? The actual culture change, language, student-to-student language, teachers really understanding the breadth and the depth of microaggressions and bias. It's a continuous process. I know many of us are still continuing to learn about and learning about how to be better. But our role really in this work and what is absolutely necessary is developing the practices, policies, systems that will protect and serve as protective barriers for our students and for our families. And I find that oftentimes when you get those things in place and you put out there what you aspire to be as a district and your goals and your vision and all of the above, many of those things follow along with it, right? So again, every single student, again, it takes time to learn. It takes time to lean into being able to have inclusive conversations and include everyone around you at the table with the policies, practices, systems, dialogue, education that we're putting forward to support our teachers. That's a requirement, and many other things will follow. Thank you all.
But I will tell you.
For sure.
Hello, Superintendent Gunning, President Clymer, and microphone. Can I sit for this or should I stand?
Okay. Good evening, Superintendent Gunning, President Clymer, and fellow members of the governing board. I am here to present to you kind of a spin-off, if you will, of my work on the Diversity Empowerment Committee, which is a first attempt at making a statement that shows our district's beliefs and commitments toward equity. I've included for your information a first draft, which is open to any and all feedback, which we will go through here in a moment. And then I also included 3 examples of basically where you can start and where you can go with diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. The first one, if you look at the Phoenix Country Day School, they make a basic statement and then they tell you some of the programs that they're doing and they give specific examples, and then they give anti-racism resources for families, and that is a web page for them and it's ever evolving. That's kind of a step 1. Step 2 would be, yes, that is this. Yes, PCDS. So that's, and there are hundreds of examples available. Amber helped walk me through some examples and I found some on my own as well. So this is kind of where we could start. I think we could start a little more involved than that. I think we could put more into our statement. The second kind of phase potentially would be this Saucon Valley School District Equity Plan. So they have goals. If you look, when we go through my proposed draft, we don't have any goals listed here, but once the committee sets the goals for us, we could certainly incorporate that into a broader document or a supporting document for that. And then for Saucon Valley, they go into more of their vision and shared values, which we have in our strategic plan. And then they go into how those shared values apply to inclusion and equity. And I have tried to do some of that in my draft as well. And then they go into specific actions as well. So I think that's what an evolution could look like for an equity statement and evolving the statement then into a plan. And then the last example is from Burlington School District, which really has a complete strategic plan specifically for diversity and equity. So this is, I think, top level. It has goals, sub-goals, the measures, strategies, everything that we kind of have behind our general district strategic plan as well. So I really wanted to provide those as an example that you can read through at any point if you haven't read through those yet. And then I wanted to spend some time, I'm not sure what the best way to do this is, but I can basically give an overview of the draft, and I'm open to wordsmithing in any way, shape, or form. I'm not a grammar person. I'm a business writer, so I tend to use as few words as possible. And I would love to include some of the conscious discipline phrasing and some of the commonality that we use in the district and incorporate those things as well. So basically, the top portion is a summary that says what we believe, how we plan to model that, and what we're making a commitment to do. And from there, we're going into each of our strategic pillars: student success, people, service, and resources, and giving examples of what that actually looks like from an equity standpoint. There are a couple of things that I don't have specifically in here because I wasn't sure how to incorporate them. One meeting, if you look at student success, there's the representative leadership, which says we strive to ensure that students of all races, ethnicities, identities, and abilities can find role models among our teachers, staff, and other adults. But that doesn't really incorporate, I think, what we're going to want to get to, which is actively hiring and retaining diverse staff. So I think the representative leadership is one aspect of that, but actively, potentially under the people pillar, we might want something that would specifically address hiring and retention. And I'm open to any other suggestions. Finances and resources, I feel like is one of the most important things to apply equitably, but I found that the most difficult to actually describe in words what that looks like. Does anyone have any questions or any initial feedback?
So, when you're talking with, as a board member,
I think it's a combination. So with the committee itself, the committee is going to come up with goals that then are going to be translated into implementation and then assessing those particular items. I don't anticipate that the committee will have a goal of set in for the board to create an equity statement. So really, I thought I could get that ball rolling, yes, because we could work together on that, not independent of, but kind of in conjunction with the work that's being done from the committee itself. And like I said, I discussed this with Amber as well and got some feedback from her. Who I haven't gotten feedback from and who I would like to get feedback from is, of course, Superintendent Gunning and Ms. Duplain to find out, what they think might be missing, and what we think might be able to be enhanced, about this document, or if there's anything particular that we might be missing from this. At the bottom, I basically say, that this is going to be an ever-evolving process. And so in my mind, this is a working document. It's not going to be set in stone, and that we will add as new information is available. But I would love to get as comprehensive of a first attempt as possible.
I think where you started is similar to the same process that we do with the board norm, right? Where you often have sort of learn more about and figure out how it represents the final us and sort of our values as district leaders, and then obviously combine that with the leaders. Specifically, I will say, some feedback that I've gotten on the strategic plan in general for our district, I would say it's a comfortable document in terms of, it's something that we sort of live by all the time, but it's also something that's community facing. And so it really has to be understood by everybody. Is that there's a difference between visioning and creating, sort of the value, sharing the values that you have, and then having direct action items of what we want to do. Right? Because I think our strategic plan is meant to be, sort of this 1 to 5 year approach on different things. So there's not a lot of, we're going to do this right now, right? That's how we sort of dig down in our scorecards and all that kind of stuff. What I would like to see from this is, something similar to the example that you showed in the Stockholm values for district, where they do have that vision, shared values, all the stuff that we have here, the pillars from our own strategic plan, which obviously we are confident in. But then it moves to some very specific action items. I mean, we might not have 7 pages right up front, but those action items, which I'm assuming would translate from the goals that our community is working on and that have identified. Because I think it's really important as a board, who are the people that are supposed to be setting the vision for the entire district, to say, these are not only the values, but these are, the actionable steps that we are hoping, we will take over a 1 to 3 year period or whatever it is. So I'd love to see a combination of, kind of the visioning of a strategic plan, but also action items of, what these plans will actually look back in 1 to 3 years and assess what actually we achieved.
I would count that probably just dovetails with me, right? I mean, the committee is providing action items for that, I would say those two obviously should work together, but and not necessarily for
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, I think that's kind of why I brought that example, was to be able to say, this is where we can get to. I'm not ready to do that today, obviously, but that's where we can get to. And my other concern, that I would like to get feedback from Superintendent Gunning on is, I want to make sure that everything in here in my draft is actually true. Because I make statements, statements are made like, in the just discipline, we review our discipline policies, practices, and outcomes to ensure we're treating students justly. I think we are doing that this year, but are we doing that consistently? I don't want to make a statement that isn't true. I would rather pull that off and then later be able to say that statement if it's not true today. So I'm not sure the best way you incorporate that. Yeah, for sure. I don't know what the best way to make that happen. I know the thought was that yeah. Yeah, I certainly expect, I even joked to Amy that this was my first draft and I said, it's not going to look nothing like it looks right now after we discussed it this evening.
In terms of like identifying goals, I know it's gonna be ongoing work, but in terms of the short term items that you're going to do there.
Amber can probably address that better than myself.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to leave you out.
No, you're good. So the next, diversity empowerment committee meeting is this Thursday. They're gonna be focused on goals, at that meeting, and then in the November meeting, we'll be focused on the, action items, like the pull downs, from those goals. So I would say end of November, we have a very formalized, pretty much like the second page of the sample ones that they showed you that have those goals. And so it's really about coming up with the, the vision, mission, this is what we aspire to be, this is what we believe, and coupling it with those action items and goals, so that external facing, or, and external folks can look at that and know exactly who you are.
And Kim, I think that a lot of these things are things that we know we will do now based on our data, but we have yet to implement consistently across our district.
Yeah.
We have pockets of people doing this because they got hold of the data and they're like, well, I'm running with this now, right? But if you were to ask me to say, are we all consistent practices and outcomes on a consistent way, I would say not yet. So I believe that I know because that was some of the data that was aligning. And people have been asking me about things for that. So we will be developing consistent practices on several of these, but if you have to say today, that would.
And that maybe, I guess we might want to break it up into, this is what we're doing today, and then as we develop these goals, these are where we anticipate those changes happening, and then being able to move those from goals into reality, and then add more goals on and do that kind of that process. Yeah.
I would say that this is more than just a statement, this is a declaration, and also stating that we will be moving forward. One way to hold accountability inside of the document, to come out and make the declaration of what I don't know if you want to talk those two or.
Well, and we certainly can. I mean, we can take a lot of the meat out of this, and as a board, just say, as a governing board, this is now the statement that we are willing to make, and we are going to ensure over time that this is the direction that we are heading, and then provide more accountability. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways we can do it.
Put in the suggestion that we this home with your examples, kind of start to begin, either if you want to either have to remember meeting and just discuss it as information only, and continue to work on it, or maybe in December meeting and be able to review the goals and then the action items from that and decide from there how we want the statement to come together. We'll have more information right from the committee as a whole. I don't think every single piece of what the community is going to do probably needs to be in there at first. Like if we're going to grow, we're going to do everything. But maybe if we wait until December, we will have these pieces of information and we can decide what exactly we want to add to this. And if have time to look at it and then be prepared to create a decision today and the timeline of, okay, we're doing it in 6 months, we're doing it in 12 months, depending on what the timeline is. I think we started this in July, 400% progress we made in 3 months, but 12 months from now, so the student meeting document, we will have to update. So we took a stab at it in December and then made a plan to, approve something initially, and then made a plan to review based on further timeline next year. That leaves us started based on the possibility.
Okay, so you're saying based on the time that we have in the remainder of 2020, we would have potentially at the December meeting, a statement that we would be able to take action on. Okay.
I'm hoping, we feel like there's enough time between the November meeting and our December meeting to put something together for us to review.
Because I do feel like time is of the essence with this. So I feel like this declaration, if you want to call it a declaration, is important. And I think it's very timely. And, yeah, I think I would like to see. So yeah, if we can.
Put it to it in November and just have, can we do a study session in November? Can we just add another one?
We have one in November. It's just a question of, if everybody wants to give an extra, 30 minutes. Because I'm more than willing to work with Superintendent Gunning or whoever, in the meantime to for them to compile the feedback, to make all the tweaks, and since I'm part of the diversity committee, diversity empowerment committee, I'll kind of have the insight on that information as well. So if we can, but we do need another opportunity to actually discuss it. So it would be up to you and I guess what other issues are on, whether the study session or the November 4th meeting. I'm fine with bringing something in December. I just don't want to push it to 2021 because I feel like that's.
December, that second meeting of action planning, we would be able to include that if we included that in there.
Yeah.
If you think we'll have enough information or whatever we would want to include in this after your big meeting, we can put on the November meeting. I was pushing for December just to give us enough time to review that technical information. And I would even be comfortable with sending, you continue to work on this in the meantime, sending that out as a board and stuff. I think that we will have enough discussion in December to be able to take action. I know this isn't going to be the final draft, but I think we see a lot of the direction and the examples that you're setting. We'll just have the actual information in there. We can have a total discussion and steps of action.
Okay, I agree. How about we go ahead, Jen.
And Amy will compile all feedback. So that way when we talk about it in whatever meeting in November, we have everybody's feedback and all of these, as well as I'm sure we can share out what the committee has. Okay, so you might continue to change your feedback as you're getting more information. So that will, I think, be more time or help the process.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Any other questions on general direction or specificity?
No, but I hope I love this question, and I love, what you said earlier, and what you said about, actual policies and things, I think we pride ourselves, right, on, teachers and staff, and, maybe we have a handful or even a dozen of teachers that are doing this right? They don't always have the opportunity to share that with other campuses or other district, leadership or whatever, just based on their position. This group right here has the ability and the power to make change for our own visiting and our own government board policies and it's one of these sectors of our district. I think that's a great responsibility for those, we should be liking, but I think that we should remember that, the policies that we create, and at some point in time we look at the calendar and we look at dress code and look at all of these things, right, that we just sort of do every year because we really have to. Even when we get an opportunity to say, we're going to create a policy that describes who we are and what we stand for. We don't have a chance to do that. So I'm excited and I'm ready to say it again. Thank you.
Can I get a little clarification on something? So I'm looking at the calendar. Are we talking about the study session that's December 1st? Because I don't see any.
We're doing the November meeting.
November 10th.
We have a meeting on November 10th.
That's when we're doing this.
And that's the study session before that?
Here's when your study session.
Yeah, everyone was saying there's a study session in November.
We do not have one in November.
Yeah, well, yeah, right.
Okay, a little more now. Okay, you're right, you're actually right. I just want to make sure because you don't need to ask, right? Fine, thank you. Check in with everybody.
Is this something, Megan, is this something that you feel comfortable presenting as an info part of our whole program review?
Oh, you want to leave? Sure.
I'm looking forward to this.
It's okay. Megan can do this in like 10 minutes. Megan will go.
Okay, all right.
I can bang it out. Okay. All right. So, gosh, I feel like it's so loud.
You don't need a microphone.
I know.
There's, I think there's volume on it.
Okay, so, Madam President, governing board members, you have asked me about how to incorporate some of our conscious discipline structures into your board meeting because you've seen it work in our schools with our students and our staff. So today I'm going to talk to you about the why of the Brain Smart Start and what it is so that you all can decide how you want to and if you want to implement it into your board meetings. So, how many times has something like this happened before a board meeting? Okay. Arguments, work piling up, fight on the phone with a teenage child, a spouse. Okay. What about some of these? I don't feel good. I have so much to do. My kids are fighting. I'm running into the board meeting. This is exactly why we do the Brain Smart Start at school, for our children and for our staff. Because when children are coming into school, when staff are coming into school, we're all humans. So we come with so many different things on our mind. The Brain Smart Start is based on brain research, and it helps get us into our executive states so we can be a part of the solution, learn at the highest levels, access our brilliance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this right now because the brain state. So like I said, if you are in an argument and on the way with somebody on the phone, or you have so many things on your mind, you may slip into your emotional state and you walk into this meeting and you're expected to be pleasant, brilliant, solutions-based problem solvers, but that's not reality because you guys are human. So in order for you to be able to access your executive state, you have to do some things that are research-based that help you get into your executive state regardless of where you came from. So the executive state is in our prefrontal lobe, and that's where we get all our executive skills from. That's problem solving, empathy, time on task, impulse control, all those things that you need to be problem solvers and to get the job done. When you're in your emotional state, you cannot do that. So we're going to talk about it. The Brain Smart Start is a practice that is based on brain research that can help change your internal state in order for you to access your executive skills. So the Brain Smart Start has 4 components. I'm going to explain to you what they are and then talk to you about how they might look in your board meeting. So one is an activity to unite. It brings everyone together. So you all are coming from different places, but you have to unite as one team to get the job done. It reminds us that we are one team, and it helps build that safety and that connection so we can access our brilliance. An example that you all might do as this activity in our board meetings is for someone to lead you in collectively reciting our mission from our strategic plan. Something that we do sometimes in our admin meetings is we do, Gina, you're gonna have to remind me. Oh yeah, let's go, Gina. Connect, educate, empower our Litchfield Elementary School District students, family, and community, okay? So we do that together. That just shows that no matter where we came from, we know what our mission is. So it's something together that you recite or that you do so that you're one team to conquer whatever you have in front of you. The next one is activity disengage stress, to disengage stress. That's breathing. We always do our breathing. And that is the diaphragmatic breathing that reduces your stress hormone level so that if you are in your emotional state, you can upshift and begin to really problem solve and be an important member of the team. And the one thing about breathing is that, I'm glad you can't see me on Zoom, I'm gonna show you. So when you breathe, you have to allow your belly to go out, right? Oftentimes when we breathe and we watch our children, we're helping them breathe because they're stressed and it's shallow breathing, and that is not helpful. So the breathing that we talk about is the diaphragmatic breathing or the belly breathing, and it is truly, everybody put your hand on your chest and your belly and take a deep breath in. If your chest goes out first, you have to retrain yourself. Try it again and push that belly out, and nobody's judging. And keep your chest as still as possible. And then when you exhale longer than your inhale. You do it again. We really work on training our students and our staff how to do that, because that is the one thing that you always can have with you, that one tool and strategy to help you upshift your executive statement regardless of how you feel. So one example of this is a board member could be assigned the job of leading the team in a breathing activity. We have a lot of different ones, and our principals will just start, and we do it obviously down to our students, but I'm talking at admin level. One person's job is to be the, disengage stress, and they can say, oh, I saw a first grader do the ping pong breathing today, and it was, right? And the kids make them up all the time, different breathing. So one of the jobs at your board meeting you could have is that one of the board members assigned a job of leading the team in a breathing activity to ensure that if anybody came in, like some of those pictures were that you, number one, you united together. Number two, you're breathing to disengage stress. The next one is to connect. And there is 4 components of a connection that conscious discipline teaches. And it's eye contact, touch, presence, and a playful situation. The touch gets a little tricky now that we do the virtual things, but those are the 4 things. And that's why you see that we prioritize greeting at the door. Every one of our classrooms has greeters at the door, whether it's the teacher or the students. And the greeting will include all 4 of those things. So an example to incorporate this connection piece in a board meeting would be that one of our board members is a greeter. They arrive 15 minutes before, they greet the guests, and board members greet each other with those 4 components as well, so that when you get started, you have that connection and you're ready to roll together as one team. The next one is a commitment. And this is an awesome way that one of the board members can come with a commitment. What we often do as our admin, if it's something we're dealing with that week, like we have so many things on our plate, the commitment might be, I'm going to commit to being totally present and shut my computer during this meeting so I can focus on this. Are we all willing to do that? Are willing? 1, 2, 3, I'm willing. And we make that commitment to each other, maybe based on something that we needed or something that we're all experiencing, so that together we're saying, yes, we commit to this right now. And then we move on. And then the next one, which is not a part of the Brain Smart Start, but it's something we find very important for our admin and our students, is that we have a person who does the meeting message or the morning message. And that is a quote or an excerpt from a piece of writing that will inspire the team to do the work that they're going to do that day. And so we often, and it's awesome because oftentimes people say, oh, you send that to me. And so we have another collection of quotes or something that will inspire us and to move together on this. And we often find ourselves quoting the quote to each other. Like, remember that morning message when we said this? Just another way for us to unite and work together and really focus on positivity to problem solve and be our best. So here they are. So the possible plan to implement a Brain Smart Start at each board meeting is that you can assign jobs. And let's say you say, you know what, we're only willing to do a couple of them. We'll start out with a couple of them. But what we do with our admin is we have the whole year planned out. Every admin meeting, we have our jobs placed, so everybody knows months in advance whatever job they are, and they plan for that. So you could have a board member activity connect and they're greeting the guests. You have a board member lead the team in breathing, an activity to unite, lead the team in reciting the LAC mission statement, or anything you say or anything you want to recite together. An activity to commit, they bring a commitment and share with the team. And then a daily message that that person will bring an inspirational quote or a verse that maybe meant something to them that week. Amen. That is the Brain Smart start. So do you have any questions or thoughts? And like I said, you can choose to wait on this, you can choose to discuss it, you can choose to incorporate one or two of them into your practices, but this is a way to bring us all from our emotional state or any chaos that we're coming from into the board meeting to sit together, connected and united as one team, so you can access your brilliance and your executive skills to get this very awesome but challenging job.
If you're choosing if these are done on camera as we get started, or are these things that we can do like on the sideline before we come in and sit down?
That's a good question.
Because we're already there, you know, we can go with it because we're not ready. Right. I mean, I don't think we can feel like talking about something like we're very kind of very down.
Yeah.
So if you know, if maybe the reading exercises, maybe that's how you do that prior to. But I wanted to remember that part of it is for this initially remembering that one I want to know because we struggle, right, to engage our families and really wanting to really understand how to understand what it is and really think on why we've done that, what it's done for our kids. And so not being fault of our own, because you know, they're just not engaging in it as much as we would want them to be. So I think this is a way for us to show that in action and for kids to not hear a lot of questions. Board members use that, you know, they're going to say, oh yeah, this is cool. Or the parents saying, oh yeah, why are they doing this weird pencil thing with their own? I'm going to say job. I'm hoping to make those questions, right? So we're educating people on what we're actually what's happening during the day or work every day. So while some of them, yes, I would like to do at least a few that we can actually use those as platforms to say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what's important to us. And as leaders, we should be showing that we're doing that and we're doing it from the top down. We don't expect students to do things that we're not willing to do. We have to lead them. I think that's part of it for you.
And they would. That's a great thing. And Elaine, that is a great idea because oftentimes our schools have breathing competitions. So they come up with the most creative and they present their idea. So that would be a great way to incorporate our kids. Yes. Oh. Yeah. That's awesome stuff. Because at a lot of our campuses, that's how when parents come to different events, kids are showing them, right? Like in this area, this is a safe place. We go here and we sit. So if they're coming to show, let me teach you the dragon breathing. Right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right? We're going to have all the time numbers.
Yeah.
You know, January, we're going to do one, and we're going to do two, just rotate them. So everyone gets to do all of them. That way we will always do it.
Yeah. so awesome. They would love it. You're right. That's right. Yeah. One last thing about the commitment too is sometimes we choose one of our norms that we want to commit, focus on that meeting. Maybe one that personally you're like, I really need to work on that. And so that's the commitment. So we commit to our norm of blah, 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 blah.
Walking into this, I was like, oh, you're going to do all this, right? Yes, you do.
And maybe, I'm wondering if maybe not in November, but for, I guess we bring in November for policy changes in December, we accept. But then in December, we can sort of have this, right, this is what we're gonna do, and this is sort of the whole thing, so that in January, we would start, and we would all have our, so we have that in December.
Can we vote on it before norms?
Yes, and that would be redesigned.
Yay, right on. I didn't forget something.
Megan, this is awesome.
Great.
Exactly what I wanted. Such a good way for us to engage our community, let our kids shine, which is a great idea. Really what we should be doing. Even though they can't be with us probably right now for a little while, we've set up the system, we'll get there. And even maybe these will change over time, like we find something that we want to do or whatever, you know, give us some more.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to get started into, not that we have the big contingent board meetings or anything like that, but again, I just like the idea that we walk in and we sort of reset yourself. So, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Love it. All right. Thank you to everyone. We are finally to A. I will entertain